Okay, Chair, you're ready to go.
Brilliant. Okay, well, good afternoon, everybody. And I'd like to welcome all councillors, officers and members of the public viewing on YouTube to this meeting of the Corporate Policy Development and Scrutiny Panel. I've got some information to go through first, which may seem a bit long, but it's very important, particularly using this video medium. So my name's Councillor Paul Myers and I'm chairman of the panel. I'd now like to call out the names of the other members of the panel and just ask them all to one by one confirm that they're present. So if we could do that now, I've got Councillor Winston Duguid.
Present.
Councillor Mark Elliott.
Present.
Councillor Andy Furs.
Here.
Councillor Lucy Hodge.
Present.
Councillor Sean Hughes.
Present.
Councillor Hal McPhee.
Present.
Councillor Alistair Singleton.
Present.
And Councillor Karen Warrington.
Present.
Well, thank you everybody for being here promptly today. Other councillors have been invited to attend today, and these are from other panels. So there's Councillor Vic Pritchard, who I believe is here. Is Councillor Michelle Doherty here? And they're chair and vice chair of the Children, Adults, Health and Wellbeing panel. No, they're not here at the moment. Okay. And then there's Councillors Karen Walker, and I don't believe Councillor Tom Davies is joining us, who are chair and vice chair of the Climate Emergency and Sustainability panel. Yeah.
Thank you for inviting me, Chair.
Oh, well done. Thank you, Karen. These councillors are here because they're from our neighbouring panels, and this is such a wide-ranging budgetary and on the agenda today topic that we felt it was appropriate that they could actually have an input. But just to emphasise, when we come to the vote, due to the constitution of the panel, they're not allowed to vote at the final vote. Also, I'd like to welcome Will Godfrey, Chief Executive, and David Trithewey, Director of Partnership and Corporate Services. I don't know if you're here, David. And then I have seen Andy Rothery, Director of Finance and Section 151 Officer, Maria Lucas, Director of Legal and Democratic, and Mark Durnford, who's Democratic Services Officer, who looks after this meeting and supports being set up. This meeting is held under the Local Authorities and Police and Crime Panel's Coronavirus Flexibility of Local Authority and Police. Can you hear me now? Hello?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah.
For some reason, I was just muted by the host as I was in full stream, it said anyway. So, anyway. So and that was a long title. The council has agreed a protocol to cover virtual meetings, and this meeting will operate in line with that protocol. The meeting has the same status and validity as a meeting held in the Guildhall. Can I remind everybody, officers and members, to keep background noise to a minimum, to only speak one person at a time and not to speak over others. If you can mute your microphones when you're not speaking and then unmute when I invite you to speak. And please indicate if you wish to speak by using the chat facility on the Zoom and by typing MIS, which is, as you recall, may I speak, and I'll call you to speak in turn. If for some reason I miss you, I apologise, and I do ensure just if you get that stuck, wave or give a shout. Yeah. Can I ask as well, if a member of the panel has to leave the meeting, then could you draw my attention to this by using the chat facility? And then if you return, then please also draw my attention in the same way. Members should also inform me if they lose a connection, although I don't know how they do that, and miss any part of the meeting. as this may result in them not being able to vote on any item if they didn't hear it in full. And should the panel need to take a vote, I'll read out each member's name in alphabetical order, and then if each member could state for, against, or abstain. I don't propose, because there aren't that many of us, adopting the approach of saying, does anybody object? Because I think we could all do it by voting that way. And this will enable the Democratic Services Officer to actually record the vote, and will also ensure that decision taking is clear to the public who are viewing on YouTube. Now, there's a sort of further introduction, which I'll come to mention the cabinet members who are also, shall we put it, in the wings. So first of all, I'd like to emphasise as your chair, as I always do, that we're here today to scrutinise on behalf of residents, and that's a role we perform regardless of which political party we belong to. We have a duty to highlight issues and questions, and really basically as our residents' representatives. But equally, as I always say, we can also look at very constructive things. It's not just about being critical or even constructive critical, but we can look for reference to policy development ideas. And I feel proud, and I think a number of us do, on our track record as trying to be an effective scrutiny panel team over the last year. And as I say, today on screen you'll see us as a panel, but because of the exceptional nature of the recovery plan, members of the cabinet are available, not showing video and on mute, so that if we should need to raise a question which the cabinet member and officer can't, Councillor Richard Samuel can't answer, then at my discretion we could put a question through to them. I would highlight that this is due to the exceptional nature of this subject and the medium, and I don't set this as a precedent at all, because it's just that within the rules it's a discretionary thing. But I am very grateful for the cabinet members giving up their time to be available should we need them. But I'm equally very mindful of our role to scrutinise, and that there is a cabinet meeting next week. So in consultation with the Vice Chair, Councillor Winston Dogood, we're mindful to really get as much time as possible with the panel and focusing on our role as scrutinising. So does anybody have any questions, having said all that? No? Right. I see you to start your video. Okay. Okay, thank you. I don't know quite why my video switched off, but it's back on now, hopefully. So can I therefore ask the Democratic Services Officer if you can give us details of any apologies for absence and substitutions?
Thank you, Chair. Happy to report that the whole of the panel is in attendance.
That's splendid. Thank you very much. Are there any declarations of interest? I'm not seeing or hearing anybody come up with anybody. As usual, if you do realise through the meeting that you have realised that you have a declaration to make, then just bring it to my attention and we will bring that in. And moving on to item 4, in terms of urgent business agreed by the chair, there is no urgent business. For item 5, public and councillor statements, I believe we have one statement. I'm very happy to welcome one of our regulars, who's David Redgewell, who has registered to speak and will now address the panel. And could I invite you, David, to unmute? And the floor is yours.
Is that speaking to me? Lost the thing. Hello, everyone. Sorry, I've just come into the meeting. Yeah, my concerns really are about West Midlands Combined Authority. and their role as the new Transport Authority for Bath and Bristol and South Gloucestershire, part cooperation with North Somerset, although North Somerset should join WECA as soon as possible. But it's about bus services, really. The Secretary of State has now told WECA from this weekend to uprate its bus services and make sure they're back to a normal operational level within social distancing, 20 on a double decker, 11 or 10 on a single deck. Well, they've upgraded a number of routes, and that's fine with First Group and Stagecoach and Fairsaver and A-Bus, but there are a number of key rural routes that have not been restored, and this is my concern. The first one is Radstock to Midsummer Norton and to Bristol on a weekend. The second one is the whole daily service from Bristol to Bath via Weston and Kelston, Bitton, along Moor Green and St George. And there's another one, the 35, which happens to run from Marshfield into Bristol. Those are main services they've not restored. And if you're trying to get to the hospital at South Bristol, Hengrove, which is a hospital for North East Somerset, down as far as Polton and Radstock, they've got no longer a connecting service at Brissington or Knoll, the 96 into the hospital at weekends, which is pretty poor, really. So I'm really urging Baines to use its clout as a member of WECA to tell the WECA mayor that he needs to up the game, really, and make sure he complies with the new government guidance. He's done so well over the emergency period, and I pay tribute to him and Peter Mann, his head of public transport. But now he does have to step up the services, and I am concerned about the lack of rural services. On another point, with the opening of the restaurants and public houses in Bath and North East Somerset, I am concerned about making sure that pavement and pavement space is safe around bus stops, and particularly for disabled people, where I feel if we're not careful with fresco dining, we could have a situation where disabled people are forced to possibly go out into social distance roadsides, which are not really safe with wheelchair users or people with blind people. So I think there's some issues for Baines as the Transport Authority and Highway Authority to look at in that respect. But I really would ask Bath and North East Somerset to make sure that WECA fulfills its new role as the runner of public transport, both responsible for both trains and buses over this period, and also bus infrastructure in particular.
Okay, thank you very much for that statement. Can we now move on to item 6, which is the minutes of the 27th of May 2020. They've been circulated. Could I please have a proposer and a seconder to confirm that these are a correct record? Right, I've got
Proposer.
yeah, Winston and there. So could I therefore go round and we take a vote, our first vote from each of you, if you're what your vote is on this. So if I could start with, I'll just get my list up to make sure I do this correctly, because some of your names don't all tally. So Councillor Dogood,
In favour.
Councillor Elliott,
For.
Councillor Furs,
For.
Councillor Hodge,
4.
Councillor Hughes,
For.
Councillor McPhee,
For.
myself, and I'm for, Councillor Singleton,
For.
and Councillor Warrington.
4.
Thank you very much. So that means that the minutes are now accepted and as a true record. Item 7, Cabinet Member Update. I'll just check that I am on. Yeah, Cabinet Member Update. We have Councillor Richard Samuel with us today, who will update the panel, as it says in the agenda, on any relevant issues. I'm sure Councillor Samuel won't mind me mentioning this, but we touched base beforehand, and I've asked him, and I'll ask everybody else, that we bear in mind that we are discussing under item 9 the financial recovery plan, and I'm quite keen as chair that we don't discuss item 9 for the next hour under the Cabinet Member Update. I'm sure you can understand that. So if I could hand over and thank Councillor Richard Samuel for coming. Richard, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I have promised I will not go through the financial recovery stuff. We'll have plenty of time for that later, I'm sure. So there are 4 items just to mention to the panel. The first is property review and the status of that. The Chief Executive has appointed Mandy Bishop to review the service, and I've had an initial meeting with her to sketch out the sorts of things that I think she will need to look at in doing that. I'm not sure at the moment what the timescale for this is, but Mandy will have started that work by now. I met her a couple of weeks ago to talk this through. So this follows up on two call-ins, as you recall, that we had during a few months ago, and we are following up on that, and I'm very happy that when we have some conclusions to report, we can bring that back to this panel before it goes to Cabinet for decision, if any decisions are needed. The second thing to report on is, despite everything else, the finance team have been working on the 1920 outturn. That will be reported to the Cabinet at the end of July, the Cabinet meeting at the end of July. I suppose the key headline figure from the outturn, and some of the numbers may have changed slightly since the last time I touched base on them, but not significantly, is that the Council balanced its budget in 1920. So that's a credit to all the staff and managers who worked on that, and the Cabinet members for their help. So I think that's quite an achievement. Clearly, it's going to be more difficult to do that this year. Also in the same Cabinet at the end of the month, we will have the annual Treasury Management Report that contains the usual stuff that's in that report. One thing I do want to highlight, because there has been some interest in members across the board on the what you might call ethical investment of funds that we hold money in. And there are some movements towards looking at how those funds invest their or our money, particularly in terms of whether they are investing in fossil fuels in some shape or form, which is something we're not keen to go down. I understand there has been a discussion recently at the Avon Pension Fund. I don't know the outcome of that, but there are some moves on the pension fund to look at this issue as well. So I hope we can move in parallel on that. Also at the next Cabinet meeting, there will be something new to go alongside financial reporting. If you remember last year, and it hasn't been proved that easy to do this with the council calendar, but we are trying to get into the discipline of a quarterly finance report looking backwards. And the first quarter for this year is due for our July meeting, but alongside that will be the first performance data report for the council in some years. I'm afraid I don't know the detail of that yet. That's still being worked on, what indicators will be reported. But I hope it's something that we can develop. And it may be that this panel, once they've seen the first version, may well want to look at that and see how that develops. It's something I'm quite keen to get the council into the routine of doing. So I think, Chair, I think those are the main things I wanted to say. I mean, perhaps in conclusion, it is perhaps true to say that the COVID work has dominated things over the last 3 to 4 months. So I won't say any more than that, because we're going to come on to that. So that's why there isn't a great deal extra to say other than those things that I've mentioned. I'm happy to take questions, Chair.
Yeah, and thank you very, very much on behalf of us all for such a very concise report today. And I've got one question from Councillor Winston Dogood. Winston, if you'd like to ask it now.
Yes, Richard, just on the property review, just remind me of the structure. Mandy Bishop, is she responsible for that area? And I'm quite interested that you've decided to go for someone who is in the senior leadership team or thereabouts of the council, rather than perhaps someone outside who may be more independent doing the property review. Can you just talk me through why you plumped for that?
Yes, I can. First of all, Mandy is not responsible for this service in her day job. She's responsible for environment, and that includes transport, waste, those kind of services. During the COVID outbreak, she was moved to work as the council's point of liaison with the local resilience forum. And that's a role she's kind of gradually extracting from at the moment, and I think leaves that role in full towards the end of August. So we had started with a process. In fact, we were pretty well on the point of appointing an external advisor to review the service, and the lockdown literally came 2 days later. So we had to abandon that route because it just wasn't practical to take it forward. And in discussion with the chief executive, this proposal came up. Will is on the meeting, so if you wish to ask a bit more about his thinking behind that. I was happy with that because I think Mandy will provide the external perspective and detachment from the issues in the property service that is required. I am sure that if she finds technical matters that are beyond her expertise, she will bring additional resource and expertise in to deal with those questions. But that hasn't arisen yet. So she is taking a high level look at the service and how it can be better organized to fulfill the objectives that I think we all share. I don't know if that answers your question sufficiently, Winston, or whether, Chair, you would like to hear from the Chief Executive.
Can I just quickly add, Councillor Myers, is that okay?
Yeah, you go for that.
So just to add to that, Councillor Dugan, so Mandy's got a lot of experience of working to transform services in many different aspects in previous roles, and that gives me a lot of confidence that actually she's able to do that. She knows the council, and I think it's important that that actually you've got to do a review, but you've got to do a review in the context of understanding the organisation. So on balance, I actually felt that's the most appropriate way to proceed. And as Councillor Samuel says, in conversation with him, I thought that was the right thing to do. I was also mindful that as we were going into a period where there was a lot of uncertainty in the organisation, and we were incurring a significant amount of cost around COVID, incurring additional cost on bringing somebody in from the outside to do that piece of work, I didn't feel that was appropriate at the time. So it was a balance of all those factors that I think means that it's right that Mandy can do that piece of work. And she started, every confidence that will be done to a very high level of competence, and we all know that's an area that we need to pay some attention to pretty quickly.
Okay, thank you very much. I had a question as a councillor on the panel, if I might ask it of myself, and that is, Councillor Samuel, not today, but for our next panel meeting, would it be possible for you to cover off the follow-up or response for the 2 call-ins? It wasn't asked for today, so there's no implied criticism, but having had a passage of time, I just wondered if we could include that within your next update specifically, if the other panel members would agree.
Chair, I'm perfectly happy for that. I will just say for the record that as some members may know, Grosvenor House has been used to house rough sleepers during the COVID crisis, and that has slightly changed the environment in which we're operating in that property, with that property. So that timescale is slightly affected by that because we have, I think, 21 rough sleepers housed in the property at the moment, and they will need to be rehoused at some point. But Graham Saybourne is working on this, and I'm keeping in close touch with him. So yes, I'm happy to bring an update to your next panel meeting, of course.
On the two call-ins, yeah.
On both call-ins,
yeah,
yes.
it's
yes.
precisely for that was why I raised it. But thank you very much. We look forward to that. So are there any other questions? Because I'm not seeing a request for one on chat. No. So on that basis, I propose that then we move on to item 8, which is the Chairs and Vice Chairs Task and Finish Group Feedback COVID-19 Position Statement. And really, I can add a short summary that the Task and Finish group took place, and there was a good discussion, and the findings were circulated to council. I just wondered, without really going through it all, I think it added slightly more strategic input to pull together the many detailed comments that we really drew out as a panel last time. I just open it up to the members of the panel. Did you have any comments or concerns or anything you particularly wanted to add to that document in terms of the way it's sort of recorded or minuted? Because I think if you have a fresh point, we can probably tackle it under the next agenda item. So are there anybody wish to speak on it? Okay. Mark, could you just advise me, do we need to take a vote on accepting the paper or not?
Not particularly, Chair. No, if you're
Right.
all happy, just proceed.
Okay, I'd like to take the opportunity, though, on behalf of the panel members, to thank the chairs and vice chairs from other panels who came along to that Task and Finish group, and thank them for their time and input, which went through to all councillors. So,
Chair, before you move on, sorry. So the paper itself, then we don't vote on it, like Mark's just explained, which is fair enough. But where does it go now? Because it says inform cabinet at their next meeting. Do we need to sort of formally send it to cabinet or whatever? I just wanted to see where it goes next.
I think it was sent with the papers to all councillors, was it not, Mark? Is that right?
My understanding was, Chair, that I think it got circulated prior to the last council meeting.
But based on your comment, Andy, would you like us to ask Mark to circulate it to cabinet members just for good measure as we've got the meeting approaching?
I think so, Chair, because at least it means that this panel's agreed it, and therefore, as it says, that comments to inform cabinet in their next meeting, there's no question that they haven't not taken due cognizance of it. Then, is there, Chair?
Good. Okay. Well, would you also like to add a copy of our original notes as well, because there was the detailed comment from the meeting itself, and that Task and Finish group really did some extra work. So perhaps both parts could go through. Yes. Would that address your point, Councillor Ferris?
I'm happy with that, Chair. It was just where does it go next? That was the sort of my fundamental question. So
are you clear on that, Mark?
Yes, Chair. Yeah, that's fine.
Excellent. Excellent. Okay. Well, if there are no other people wishing to speak, we'll move forward to one of the key items on the agenda, which is item 9, which is the COVID-19 2021 financial recovery plan. Just before we go into this, I just wanted to try and suggest a bit of structure. When we had our last discussion of the last paper on this subject, we did spend nearly all the time on real detail, and we found it quite hard to come up for air at the end, which is why we had the Task and Finish group. This time, I'd like to put to you all that perhaps if we thought about, we'll have our presentation from Andy Rothery and Will Godfrey presenting the report. And then when we look at our questions, I wondered if it might be useful if we tried to allocate our time into two parts. The first part being looking at quite high level strategic questions and the context, and then maybe going round a second time into very detailed aspects. And that if we allow an hour for this session, or 50 minutes, including the presentation, we can make sure when we get to the end, we've sort of covered both aspects, both the context, the strategic, and the detailed. Because I think if we have one or the other, we could be missing out, as we did last time, and that was a problem. Does anybody have a problem with that? If you want to speak to it, but I'm not going to enforce it that strictly, but it's just to try and keep that balance as we go through, so we don't disappear down a rabbit hole for 20 minutes on one particular amount of money or an issue, and then we don't have time to review it overall. No, if we're okay with that. Okay, so on that basis then, I would like to invite Andy Rothery and Will Godfrey to present the paper to us, and then we'll go through questions and go into debate with the panel members. And should there be an issue where we do get stuck, remember we do have our cabinet members on hand to unmute and unvideo and come in and answer a question if we really need to. So thank you very much. Over to you, Andy and Will.
Okay, Councillor Mann, so perhaps I can just make some very brief opening comments, and then Andy can take you through in more detail. So obviously, this has been the focus of a lot of work over the last couple of months, off the back of a wholly unprecedented set of circumstances that every local authority across the United Kingdom has been facing. So what we've seen is a significant increase in expenditure, but probably more relevant from a Bath North East Somerset perspective, a very significant decrease and a hit on the income that we receive, principally from three areas: our heritage services, our commercial estate, and also our car parks. All of this pressure adds up. Well, as originally, it's about 53 million pounds. We've had 10 million pounds so far from government in terms of support, but that expenditure and lack of income is all due to the unprecedented impact of the current circumstances around the pandemic. So clearly, we can't just sit here and hope that everything will sort of be okay by the end of the financial year. We have to, both myself as head of paid service, Andy in his role as 151 officer, we've got personal responsibility around ensuring that the council manages its money effectively. And what we've been doing over that period of time is obviously working with colleagues, advising the cabinet about how it is that we can then essentially put the council back on firm financial footing for the rest of this financial year. And that's the work that we've been doing. That's the basis of this report. And you will see within here that actually what this does is it presents a package that, on the current set of circumstances, would then lead us to ensure that we've got a balanced position. I think there's just a couple of things that I want to emphasise, and then I'll ask Andy to talk in more detail. So the first thing is to say this is based on what we know at the moment. Obviously, if there were to be a second spike of infection and increased expenditure, then we would have to come back, and we'd have to re-advise cabinet. We'd have to come back and prepare another plan. I think the other thing to say is this is very much the first step. So there's still a lot of uncertainty, a lot of unknowns about things like our income position, the ongoing position of government, etc. And clearly, as we gain more information over a period of time, then we will continue to update the plan, continue to advise cabinet, and obviously very happy to come to this panel to talk about that more detail. So that's just a bit of context, and maybe now I can ask Andy to go through the plan in a bit more detail. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Will. So I think, just really echoing Will's points, this paper is our first full financial impact assessment of the impact on our revenue budgets from COVID-19, and the papers set that out in terms of the headlines and also how the detail affects our portfolios. So I'll focus really on the executive summary of the paper and talk through some of the numbers and give some context around those. So quite early on, we assessed that our revenue pressures £42 million, and as Will said, around 30 million or just in excess of 30 million is related to our income budgets. And then we also have kind of what I'm calling new pressures. So on our expenditure budgets, we're finding that we've got new demand as a result of COVID. So just focusing on at a portfolio level, our resources portfolio, we've got and I think just make the point that this is gross pressure before mitigations and before any government grants. So on our resources portfolio, we have 7.6 million, and that's largely down to commercial estate income that is in 2021. Our adults portfolio is an area where we're anticipating new expenditure pressures from pressures in the care markets and also general demand and new placements into social care, so additional costs, and that's 5.1 million. Then our transport portfolio that has our parking services, that has 8.5 million, and that's largely down to loss of income through underutilisation of the car parks through the lockdown and whilst the COVID-19 restrictions continue. And then really the largest hit area is our community services portfolio, which has the heritage services. And then so that's our Roman baths, where we're anticipating significant income loss. We've already faced significant income loss when we compare current position to last year, and we are projecting further income loss through having to make sure that the venues opened very safely and will have reduced capacity, and we're anticipating reduced demand also within heritage services. So that really sort of, in a way, summarises the 42 million pressure across our revenue budgets. In Appendix 1, we've got a set of in-year revenue mitigations that total 20.7 million. These are all one-off mitigations to manage that pressure across income and expenditure, and breaking them down into a little bit of detail, around 11.6 million of those are within the resources portfolio and many corporate mitigations where we've identified and used corporate contingency budgets that are factored into our budget for risk. They need to be utilised to mitigate these pressures. And also we've looked quite broadly across other areas where we can assess the balance sheet and release one-off money into revenue to help mitigate the loss of income and over budget position. Also, a large area of the mitigations is within heritage services, where the expenditure element of the service is being reduced to reflect the reduction in income also, so one-off reduction in cost within that service. And then we have identified areas within adult social care where there can be efficiencies created, and also there's some aspects where in the early stage the cost of social care in some areas has gone down also. So that's created a set of mitigations within the adult services portfolio. And then across the boards, there's a range of mitigations from miscellaneous underspends, holding vacancies, and some specific areas that are detailed in the appendix that equate to about 3.1 million. So that summarises the 20.7 million of service-based and corporate mitigations. Then we have the utilisation of the COVID-19 revenue grant that's been awarded to Baines, that's 10 million. So putting those two figures together, that's 30.7 million of mitigations against 42 million of pressure. So that leaves us with a deficit position of 11.4 million. And this, to mitigate this, because we have to fully fund our revenue outturn position, we're proposing on using 5 million of our general unearmarked reserves, and also our reserves that are set in the budget for financial planning. So this is allowable use of those reserves because they are earmarked reserves, but for use in financial planning and mitigation of overspend positions. So that really summarises the revenue position and how we're mitigating that to balance the year-end position. Within the paper, there's also the capital review that's in parts related to our mitigations and recovery plans. Quite early on, we identified that we'd need to review our capital programme to look at the profile of capital spending because of the COVID-19 lockdown and restrictions. Some of our schemes timetables needed to be revisited and reprofiled to take into account where work could not be carried out under the circumstances of the lockdown. So a number of schemes have now had readjusted delivery timetables. That has led to rephasing of the budgets. So what that does is puts a more accurate delivery timetable for spending capital money. But because that has resulted in rephasing and slippage of schemes, it does also create a revenue saving. So it's a really prudent approach to do this and identify where we can create revenue savings from not entering into borrowing at the levels originally anticipated when we set the 2021 budget. So that covers really the capital element, and also I've covered the revenue element. So the pressures that Will highlighted also do cover council tax and business rates. So the report shows our anticipated impacts on council tax and business rates, which is really down to payment profile and a reduction in payment in 2021. So we're anticipating up to 6 million on our collection fund from payment risk, and also 1.5 million on our business rates. But the actual accounting of that does not impact our bottom line of the 2021 budget. The collection fund is accounted a year after. So if we have a reduction on our collection fund base, that's something we'd have to recognise when we set the 21-22 budget. So also related to business rates, the report sets out that the council has now almost fully awarded the business rates grants. So this is a new scheme to respond to businesses who are having financial difficulty as a result of COVID. So 2,921 grants payments have been awarded. That's £38 million, and 97% of the funds that was allocated to Baines has been paid, and we're continuing to make payments. So we've had really good performance in issuing those grants out to businesses to make sure they've got the funds to really mitigate some of their costs and the financial pressures they're facing. So I think the last thing really to cover is the MHCLG funding that's set out in the paper. So I've mentioned that 10 million of MHCLG grants has been awarded to Baines in recognition of COVID revenue pressures, and that is funding new costs, and also it's a unring-fenced grant, so it's helping mitigate some of our income deficits also. But you know, the majority of that grant is helping fund new expenditure pressures. We also have 3.21 million of other grants that include the social care infection control grant. We also have £850,000 of the test and trace grant. These are ring-fence grants, and we're anticipating that those grants will be utilised in full for helping support the social care sector in terms of their infection control and purchasing PPE, and also putting in the local outbreak plan and measures around testing for COVID cases, and putting in prevention measures also. So these grants aren't mitigating our overall 42 million pressure. They're ring-fenced and have intended purposes that we expect they'll be used in full. And if there are balances, we'll look at any areas where there's allowable use within some of the pressures, because we have advanced funded things like PPE. So really, the report summarises what we know to date in terms of grants from MHCLG. We are hopeful that there will be further funding issued to local government, and this is an area that we've really made sure that the BAME's position with income has been known to MHCLG, because as a council we are in a unique position with our reliance on income, and it's something that both myself and Will have really quite early on made very clear to MHCLG, and also with the support of Dina and Richard. We've engaged ministers also, so they're very aware of the new unique position we're in, the steps we're taking in terms of our recovery, but also in terms of further funding. We need to ensure that grant can be accessed and utilised to help mitigate. Definitely our use of reserves, because putting over-reliance on reserves is not a place we really want to be in. And also, if we can mitigate any of the challenging financial recovery measures through further grants, that's something that we'll want to explore also. So I think really they're the main things I wanted to cover in presenting the paper. Just to add, in terms of the appendices, alongside the Appendix 1 financial recovery detail, there's an equalities impact assessment in Appendix 4, and our capital review information around schemes that are reprofiled is in Appendix 2, and also where there's been some realignment of schemes in terms of narrative and grouping schemes together, that's in Appendix 3. So, Chair, I think that's everything I really wanted to cover in terms of presenting the paper. So.
Good. Well, look, on behalf of the panel, thank you for that and for all you're doing, and thanks also to Will Godfrey for your input. What we'll do now is we'll open this up. I've got 2 speakers already. We'll begin with questions, yeah? And if we can get through the questions in about the next 20 minutes, then we'll have time for 20 minutes each, hopefully, on the strategic, and then more details still. So without further ado, if I could invite Councillor Winston Duguid to open the questions.
Yes, thank you, Chair. 2 questions on the top level. I'm just not quite clear, and I don't know if other panel members are, on the arithmetic here, Andy, so just guide me, and sorry if I'm slightly slow on this. When we last met, I understood that the gap was 43 million, and that was 53 million less 10 from central government. It now looks as if we're at 42 million.13 the gap. We've got taken off that the 20.7 cuts, postponements, whatever we want to call it. Then we've got the unrestricted COVID-19 10 million. Then we've got the reserves of 11.43. So what I'm curious about is the unrestricted COVID-19. Is that another 10 million on top of the initial 10 million that was given by government? And how does that all fit in with the 13.12 number? So I'm not quite clear, sorry about that. And the second question is on the general shape of the top line. I would be interested to know if you've consulted with the auditors and what they feel about the use of reserves and the level of cuts, postponements in terms of the bigger picture.
Okay, thank you, Winston. So on the first question, the way this report's presented is slightly different from the previous update, because what I had to do in the paper is differentiate between the kind of the total gross pressure of around 50 million, focused down on the revenue pressure in year, which is the 42 million. So that 42 million excludes the collection fund figures, which are 7.5. So you'd have to add those back, which gets you to broadly the 50 million. The figures have moved, a little bit also since the first update. So there have been a couple of favourable movements that took things down a little bit from the first update. But when you add back the 7.5, that broadly gets to the 50 million. So the use of COVID grant is still the same, and that's the same 10 million pounds. So hopefully that explains, I think, the sort of the 10 million variance that you were exploring.
Okay, are you happy with that, Winston?
Yes, thanks.
Okay, our next speaker is Councillor Karen Walker.
Thank you, Chair. Page 48, the report item 3.13. Overspends will normally be expected to be recovered within the following year. However, a period of 3 years may be allowed for the recovery of overspends, depending on the level of overspend and the subsequent impact on the recovery. So I have 3 questions on that. What is the possibility that this council will take 3 years to recover with less income in from heritage services, parking and commercial rent? That's question 1. Question 2, if the council are having to make 20 million savings to recover from the COVID outbreak from March to now, if we have another severe outbreak, where would this council find a further savings? So, and then question 3, why did the council stop parking charges when we first went into lockdown? Because that would have brought in a small amount of income.
Would you like to reply, Andy, to that one?
Thank you, Karen. So on the overspend position, the recovery measures do set out as much in-year action as possible to manage down that overspend. So with the use of reserves, that is around the 11 million mark. That is the kind of the true deficit in terms of our bottom line that would be reliant on reserves. In terms of the work in the overspend over 3 years, this is a one-off in-year overspend. We're not anticipating that to continue, so that will be fully funded within years. So in terms of our financial planning, the aspects we'd have to think about in future years is the repayment of our reserves. I am happy with the risk that we're facing now. It is unprecedented, and I feel comfortable with the use of unearmarked general reserves, and I do feel we'd have to hold a reduced level of general reserve throughout the coming years because of the unprecedented risk we're funding this year. So in terms of our future year's recovery and understanding the full impact on a recurrent basis, it is really too early to fully assess that. If we are in a position of the level of income loss we face this year continuing into future years at the same level, we would have to open into some pretty direct dialogue with MHCLG to understand that fully and understand their response in terms of funding to local government. But also we would have to also really look in detail at our options around trying to reduce our reliance on income. But it is something that really all of these components need to be factored into our setting of the medium-term financial strategy for future years, because it is an unprecedented in-year challenge.
Can I just add to that, which is just to say that obviously, you know, if there is a second wave of infection and that brings costs, then clearly we would be in a very different situation. As I said at the beginning, this is step one, knowing what we know. If things change throughout the financial year, then you know it's a very dynamic set of circumstances, and clearly at that stage, you know, we'd have to have a different conversation with the cabinet administration, and there'd be a different conversation with you and the rest of council about what it is we would do to actually mitigate any further costs in year. So you know, I can't stress enough, this is a very dynamic situation, and we need to consider this as the first step, because this is just responding to what we know so far, and that there may be very different circumstances throughout the rest of the financial year.
Okay, Councillor Warrington.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I had a couple of questions regarding the reserves. I know that you've mentioned that you might have to operate with lower reserves, Andy. Over what period do those reserves need to be replenished? And the second one is, what reserves do we have left following that 11.43 million drawdown. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, so on the unearmarked reserves, the level that's held in the balance after the utilisation of the 5 million, that is a suitable level of reserve for risk and consistent with our neighbouring councils when benchmarked. So that's a reserve level that doesn't directly need to be replenished, but it is prudent in times when the council underspends to actually build that reserve up also for risks like the risk we're facing now. So that brings us on to the revenue budget contingency reserve and also the financial planning reserve. The utilisation of both of those is large in year to mitigate the overspend, sorry. But a balance is held on those reserves for setting next year's budget that is suitable. Over the course of the future years, I would want to factor in a repayment of that reserve that's built into our financial planning process. So when we set the budget, we would have a requirement in terms of financing the council to build those reserves back up. So that's something that I do over a period of time, so it's very structured. So it's something that we can plan in a timely manner. So,
so Chair, I have a further question. What would you want to build those reserves back up to?
So that's really subjective down to what the strategy for the council sets out and what the financial challenge is over future years. So I can't give an exact figure now because that needs to be informed by understanding the situation we're dealing with now and also how we go about setting our future years financial strategy and the requirements on the council. And
okay,
on a year-on-year basis.
Okay, and then can I just clarify? Did you say 5 million reserves?
So to clarify, on the unearmarked, we currently hold 13.5 million of general unearmarked reserves in balance, and this paper sets out using 5 million of that, so it'll take our unearmarked reserve down to 8.5 million.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair.
I've got myself in the list, not as chair, but as my own question as a member of the panel. What I don't quite understand is that given the reference to fluidity and then the need to redo the plan again, when it comes to the government and how much they might give, we've got 3 scenarios. We've got green, amber and red, I think it is. So when we look at what the government might give, we can come up with 3 scenarios. And we don't need to then rewrite the plan dependent on what scenario might happen because we've set out 3. But when it comes to the whole plan, that I don't sense a sense of it being very resilient. It's almost like a risk assessment that doesn't sort of push the boundaries very much. And I just wonder, are there a lot of assumptions behind these figures that we're not really seeing? So you're actually saying that we're not seeing, oh, well, visitors may recover to this level or that level or whatever level. And allied to that is this whole issue of, is it we're saving 20 million, but they're one-off savings. So where does that work if we get to the end of the financial year and hopefully nothing unexpected happens too many times so we don't have to keep refinancing? It doesn't feel very resilient without wishing to be critical. I think trying to be positive, couldn't we make it a bit more resilient?
So I think Andy might have some comments on this. I mean, I have to say, I think I would disagree with that assessment. I think it is a very well thought out plan, and I think compared to other authorities, it's very resilient, and we're much further ahead than most other authorities who are in this position. We have a in-year issue, which this plan is set out to try to address. Now, what we're trying to balance here is the requirement to start addressing that with the fact that this is a dynamic set of circumstances, and you know, I think I'm relatively confident now that we will get some additional money from government, and because we've got a package of savings that enables us to actually meet the deficit we've got, we are able, as we go forward now, to to actually look at that package of savings in the context of the financial position which will unwind as we go forward. Nobody can sit here with 100% certainty and project to the 31st of March and say this is precisely what will happen. My view, as I say, is compared to most other authorities, we've done a significant more work around our financial position. We've had significantly more conversations with UK government. You know, from my perspective, I'm very, very comfortable that we put forward to Cabinet, and we put forward to you today, a programme which I think is very well thought out. It's a balance between corporate mitigations and service mitigation. So we try to minimise the impact on frontline services, whilst recognising we've got a significant financial challenge to meet. And I think, my personal view, it's a very well balanced.
I think if we could go for a bit of conciseness, but I think that has responded to the question I've asked, unless Andy wants to add any more concisely.
No, I think Will's covered everything. Thank you.
Okay, next speaker then is Councillor Singleton.
Thank you, Chair. This is really just a question of clarifying my own understanding about the timings of revenue recognition. When we're looking at issues of council tax arrears or rent arrears, in the commercial world, once an invoice is out, you might carry it over as a debtor, and possibly only recognise it as a bad debt sometime down the way when you've tried to pursue it and convert it into cash. How does it work in local government terms, since presumably a lot of the council tax and commercial rents will in effect be invoiced?
Okay, thanks, Alistair. So for our revenue account, everything invoiced in year does need to be recognised in year in terms of our accounting in the income and expenditure account. So in our main revenue account, the only difference is our collection fund, because it's so large and complex that if we end the year with a collection fund deficit, the financing of that would need to be factored into the future year's budget to basically take into account a reduced projection on the collection fund. So that's the only sort of I would say anomaly in terms of accounting, but everything else is recognised above the line around say commercial income and payments from on our commercial estate.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Howell McPhee next.
Yeah, I'd like to pursue this collection fund issue, because do you have the money that you collected from last year ready to go? Because it seems like we've got a 7.5 million shortage this year, and you're just saying we don't have to do anything about that this year, we can put it on to next year. Well, that means that we've taken 11 million out of the reserves and we've loaded a 7.5 million debt onto next year.
So we don't have a collection fund surplus to the tune of 7.5 million, but we do hold, so we've fully collected from last year. That's now that funds our cash flow. So the projected deficit this year, because it's all due to timing, so it's anticipated. It won't be fully quantified until we close the accounts get towards the end of this year. So then we'll be able to do a full assessment of what that deficit is, and that's why we select sort of account for the collection fund at a year in arrears.
Still means that we are shoving a deficit over into next year, though, doesn't it?
It does, yes.
And you, again, going back to Winston's point, the auditors will be happy with that.
Yes, it's our recommended way of accounting across all councils. It's how we account the collection fund.
Thank you.
Could I just follow on with a question of my own off the back of that? When it comes to the commercial estate and our tenants, if businesses are in difficulty and they're going to survive, and we obviously want as many as possible, where do we work with the rent holiday? And am I understanding correctly that they have to pay within this financial year? Could you just clarify the position on that for me?
So with all of our businesses under their tenancy agreements, we've been very diligent in terms of following MHCLG guidance for landlords and tenants. So what we have agreed is a deferment, deferral of payment, but we are expecting payment at the latter stages of this financial year. So what we're not in a position to do is agree rent-free periods, because what that would do is, it would add to the projected deficits and the gross pressure that we've discussed today.
Okay, but that could have presumably quite a profound effect on the rental income if the only option is for people to go to the wall if they can't pay it at the end of the year, and that would impact on next year's money quite significantly, wouldn't it? It's like, it's one thing to have a debt to carry over, but obviously if we lose the debt through, unfortunately to mention it, bankruptcy, and as a result we lose all hope of that income in a market where it's quite hard to get a new tenant.
Yeah, this is a extremely challenging area, and as a landlord, we're not alone in terms of how to respond to our tenants. So it is something that is a full risk that we're recognising. But in terms of the response and how to manage this, it's something we do need to be completely consistent with neighbouring councils in the sector generally.
Okay, I think that we've had the last speaker on questions. So unless oh, Karen, are you shaking your head?
Sorry.
Do you want to come up onto mic? Yeah. No. Did you have a question, Karen? Wave if you do.
Sorry, Lucy is also registered to speak.
Oh, I'm sorry. I do
No,
apologize.
don't worry. That's fine.
Over to you, but that's why I asked. So thank you.
No, that's absolutely fine. It's just a small question that I just wanted to understand on the use of the percentages and the use of unbalanced reserves, Andy. It's just a figures thing, really. So it seems that we've been prudent in only using 5 million of drawing down of general unmarked reserves and leaving council balance at 7.2%, which is a balance that is 2% higher than the average use of general unearmarked reserves. I just can't compute that 7.2%. Where does that come from? And had we taken the same position and it be 5.2%, 2% less, how much money extra reserves could we have put in? Does that seem to make sense?
Yeah, so it's as a percentage of our net revenue budgets.
Okay.
So 7.2% is a percentage of our 118.2 million net revenue budgets.
Okay, right. So we could have used, if we'd taken it down, if we'd been spent as much as everyone else, it's down another 2%, isn't it? So do you know off the top of your head what that would have been, or no?
Well, I don't have to get my calculator out, but
no, that's fine.
A couple of £1 million.
Yes, that's all it would have been.
Yeah, what I would say though is it's something that I would be very reluctant to do because of the commercial income exposure we have in Bain. So whilst this is benchmarking for our neighbours,
all right,
the highest exposure. So that's why it is completely prudent to hold, to be the higher benchmarker when we compare ourselves.
Okay, I understand that. Thank you.
Right, I believe I've got Andy next.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Mine leads off that ideally. So when you say the other authorities have got, what was it, 5 point whatever and 6 point whatever percent, what local authority, what neighbouring authorities are we talking about? Are we talking about Cuba authorities or West or Wiltshire? Is that a big difference in numbers?
Yeah, they're all of our southwest neighbours around us are unitaries that surround us.
And the size of their budgets are comparable. So we're talking about the same absolute numbers, are we?
So differing reserve levels, because net budgets are materially different for each of the authorities. But the percentage is an application of net budgets for money held in reserve as general reserve.
I don't think that answers my question. So to what absolute numbers are, we know our absolute number that we're talking about. Yeah. What I don't understand how we can compare percentages without, because we're all, I understand the percentage of revenue, but we're talking about crisis levels of reserves, of which absolute values seem to me mean more than percentages.
Yeah, I'll provide the information on the benchmarking if that's helpful.
Thank you. Yeah. Because we're all dealing with the same risk going forward. So if we've all got about, I don't know, 5 million or 8 million pound in the pot, then we're all dealing with the same level of risk going forward, regardless of revenue, because as you've said, and it brings on to my next point about the lower levels of income, and I think somebody else raised it as well. I just want to take that another step further. So within the budgets we've got for this year, okay, you've obviously, well, I assume that you've taken into account a much lower percentage of income from heritage services, etc., because that income stream will not come back, well, is unlikely to come back this year, although in your risk profile it only says something like possible, yeah. And then so that but next year the likelihood that there's an overall lower level of income across the board, that's both landlord income, which was mentioned earlier, and the heritage services income, which is going to be a percentage, 80% of what a normal year is at best, maybe lower, yeah, because of the sheer number of tourists or the people you can fit into a building at any one time. So how's that profile looking forward? Because if we're rolling forward, the discussion earlier was about rolling forward debt, and I think we all understand why, because we're dealing with such big numbers, yeah, that if the overall income next year and possibly the year after is also lower, how are we going to square that circle?
Can I just come in there, Andy? So look, it's important to recognise we're not today talking about future financial years. We're talking today about this financial year. Yeah, so this plan is about addressing the deficit we've got in this financial year. Clearly, Councillor Furze, the issue, what you refer to about the ongoing income, etc., is a pivotal conversation, and that will be addressed as we go forward with the medium-term financial plan. But this report only deals with this financial year. Can I just quickly address one more point? So the issue of risk and balances, this is a very important issue for people to understand. We are more exposed to income than any other local authority in the United Kingdom. So as a percentage of our net budget, our income is a much greater proportion of funding than other local authorities. That's why, as a percentage, holding more in reserve is really important, because obviously what we've seen in the last few months is that when we're faced with uncertain economic circumstances, that income source is actually quite vulnerable. And when you've got that vulnerability, it is very important to hold a higher percentage of reserves than other authorities across the UK, and that's why we have got high level reserves than other people. and it's really important for us to ensure that's a point that's understood.
Okay, I've got.
Thank you, Will.
I've got Winston, Hal, and Karen Walker, and then I really do think we need to move on if we're going to wrap this up by 6:30. So if I could draw a line on questions there, unless somebody's really got burning questions, that we then, after these 3 questioners, move on to debate, and as the panel debate what we've seen and heard, because I think questions we could flow all day and into tomorrow, actually, because it's a very interesting subject and a very detailed one. So Winston, you've actually written in the comments.
Andy didn't have time to answer my second question, and at this particular resonance because of Will's comment. I mean, Grant Thornton are our auditors, and they've got a number of local authority clients. So I'm just interested to know, have you sense checked this with the auditors, and are they happy about the overall shape of cuts, postponements versus use of reserves, etc.? Andy?
Yeah, yes, I have. In short, I brief Grant Thornton on a regular basis and have shared our cabinet papers with them. And yeah, they've definitely they're fully aware of the approach we're taking. I haven't asked them for written endorsement, but we do have an open dialogue on this, so they're fully aware of the approach.
Okay, does that answer your question I asked this time? Yeah. Yes, we're nodding, good. So Councillor Walker's indicated you're happy not to be on the list. So Hal McPhee is our final questioner. Yeah.
And I suppose I can, just looking ahead, one can see that the behaviour of people is putting pressure on neighbourhood services, picking up rubbish unexpectedly. Have you budgeted for that? Would you say satisfactorily, the extra costs of possibly opening another recycling centre?
Who'd like to answer that one?
Would you like to take this one, Will?
Yeah. So look, clearly we're going to keep all of those operational issues under review as we progress through the rest of the financial year. In the context of additional spending as we go along, again, we will monitor that. We will ensure that as we proceed, if there are additional costs, then clearly that will be reported back to the usual measures. And as in any financial year, if there are more costs than we anticipate, then we look for mitigation measures across, the budgets to ensure that we can actually we can manage the finances effectively. And as we've seen, at the end of last financial year, I can only talk since October 2019. When I first came into the organisation, we were heading for an overspend. We've managed the budgets down to make sure that by the end of the financial year, the finances were balanced, and that's good financial management, and that's just about ongoing mitigation of spending pressures, and we'll continue to do that.
Okay, so I make that the end of the questions. So if we could now move with the panel into debate, and would anybody like to begin by speaking? Right, Councillor Hughes, the floor is yours.
Okay, well, I think there's quite a few questions raised by this report. So maybe I'll just kick it off with a question to do with salaries. So we're going to save 2.84 million.
Could I just hold you there a second? When you say you're going to raise a question, it's a rhetorical one, is it more or less? Because we've ended the question, so it's to the panel, yeah? Or do you mean to the officers or Will?
Well, you tell me. I'm just trying to understand how we're going to save 2.84 million pounds in this financial year through vacancies and reduced hours. So take it as you like. If it's
All right. Well, look, I don't think it is a rhetorical question. So, Andy or Will, can you or Andy, can you answer that?
Yeah, let me try to answer that. So, although our net budget's 118 million, our controllable spend is around 250 million, and about 82 million pounds of that is relates to staffing. So you can't construct a feasible recovery plan without some way of looking at staffing spend. So what we've done is we're in dialogue with staff. We've talked this through the unions about actually trying to think of ways to reduce our spend. And again, that is an ongoing issue. So we've been through a process where we've asked people to think about, do they want to purchase more annual leave? Do we leave some vacancies for a period of time? And again, that's an ongoing task. And we'll continue to monitor how much money we can actually get from that source, and we will continue to report back. But that's we felt that's an appropriate level of saving to aim for from our staffing budget. So we probably think we've already secured, probably about £2 million of the total amount of staffing reductions we're looking for. So we'll continue to do that, but we're pretty confident that actually we'll be able to secure that level of saving.
Okay, so on that basis, Sean, has that answered your question? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, excellent. So if we can now move to the debate, so we're more or less notionally, unless you've got a question, we'll press ahead with debating this. And really our job now is, having scrutinised with questions, I think it's for us to come up on a view on the report, some constructive ideas if we've got them, things that could be improved. What comments or omissions do we really want to put forward in our sort of conclusions, having had a debate, to the Cabinet, having had time to scrutinise this? So would anybody like to start? No. Okay, well, on that basis, I will. I'll have a go. And this is, in saying this, this is me as a member of the panel, not just the chair. I think I've got 4 really key points I'd want to make at a strategic level, which I'm concerned about, or actually I think could improve this plan. I've said this before and I'll say it again. This plan seems to me very much based on the idea of normality returning. The whole 20 million saving is a one-off. Our chief executive has explained to us how this is an in-year plan, but I'm still a bit disappointed and worried. Either an awful lot of work's going on and they're so confident that they're going to turn it round, and we can wait till the end of the year, or maybe the work's going on. But I'm concerned that, as has already been mentioned, I can't remember who was saying, well, visitors are not going to be coming back instantly come 1st of April. The parking revenue is probably not going to bounce back. And the commercial estate, however much coronavirus has affected it, was facing long-term significant issues, as in all retail space, which have been exacerbated by this. On top of that, as a council, we've benefited from income from businesses, but I think there's a real danger that we remember we're a business when it suits us. And I think whichever political party's been in, this has been the case. It's nice to have the money rolling in. But then when there are issues, it's easy to think, well, we're a council and the normal business laws don't apply to us. Well, thousands of businesses up and down the country are having to face up to a reality, and then they're not indefinitely expecting taxpayers to foot the bill. So the question that concerns me is are we seriously saying then we're not going to shape our resources and look at, say, reducing headcount until next year, or unless it gets really bad? And I'm astounded that this recovery plan seems to be so short-term focused. And I'm confident that there are measures to tackle the long-term investment, because we've heard that there's a review of property services. But if we don't get that green bailout in the plan, where the one part of the plan where we can have scenarios concerns somebody else, but we can't have scenarios because it's an in-year plan, it just seems like there isn't enough content in here about actually beginning to prepare and consider the various range of options. And I think that's what this plan, in my view, would benefit from, because surely we can accept by now that there's going to be a new normal. Things are not just going to come back how they are. And I feel, in scrutinising this on behalf of residents, I make an appeal, I would, to Cabinet to try and consider a little bit more what could be done to illustrate the scenarios, so that some of the obvious things that might well happen, we could have a scenario for, with some costings, like another national lockdown, another spike locally, where, as in the Leicester case, as illustrated, things can happen locally. And I would have thought the government would look kindly on some better planning and more facing up to the structural change now, rather than presumably we're going to wait for another plan to begin to look at where our commercial estate and businesses and our business income is going to go in future. So I'm trying to be constructive here, and I do have a fear that, you know, this plan needs some more content. So would anybody else like to speak? Karen Walker, you're the last speaker, but you didn't want to speak, is that right? Yeah, yeah. And
I'd like to speak at this phase, Paul, please.
Okay, that's good. So I'm just trying, it's so difficult to follow this chat because it's a question of linking up the time. So Lucy, is the 5:54 speaking slot, have you already spoken on that, or have you requested to speak? You need to unmic to sort.
Yes, sorry, it's just to speak again, actually.
Oh, good. Okay. So I'll go through then from there. I've got Lucy, I've got Karen Warrington, I've got Hal McPhee, I've got Karen Walker, yeah, and then I've got Winston, yeah, and we'll take it from there. I have got Councillor Samuel, but we're in debate, so I'll check with him in a moment, but let's get the debate going a bit more first. So Lucy.
I was really, I don't know whether this is the time, but I was building on what Sean has said, and that's really relating to detail of the recovery plan. Because the same concerns that he has. I mean, they're slightly answered by Will's question, putting the staffing costs in perspective. You know, if they're 82 million of 200, then finding 3.5 million of cuts, you know, obviously is it's more in perspective. But what I'm concerned with the lack of the detail, where there's all these vacant posts that can be held without compromising service delivery. And I'd feel much more confident with the plan if we knew what some of those posts were, perhaps not so much in the commercial services, but in childcare at children's services, 270,000 holding vacant posts without compromising service delivery. I mean, I know one of those very small posts, it's not a big issue, but it's in music and it definitely has compromised service delivery. You know, it's only 40,000, but there's 3.66 million of such posts, and it would be nice to have a bit more detail on them. But I don't know whether we're discussing that now or we're discussing the general shape of the strategy. But really building on what Sean said, I think.
I think if we hold that thought for the summing up, yeah,
yeah,
and bring that in. But thank you, Lucy. Next one is Karen.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, I clearly recognise this is a very difficult and challenging period. I'm concerned, just as Lucy and Sean are, by the a bit of a lack of detail and potentially some assumptions that have been made. For instance, I watched the webinar yesterday, and there were a couple of assumptions that I picked up from that I didn't actually pick up from the paper. And apologies if I've just missed them in the paper, but but the detail I can go through a bit later when we get down to the details debate. But I really would like to see some of those assumptions in there, so that I don't feel like I'm really able to scrutinise it in as much detail as I would like to. I know that statement was made in the webinar that we were dependent on what the government decided to do in terms of the release of the lockdown, but we need to define, I believe that we need to define what a new normal might look like, and what sort of measures we need to be taking again for that new normal, and again for I'm really concerned about a second spike, and how we will deal with that. I understand this is the first step, but usually when you're doing your first step, you can at least sort of make notes about what ifs, and we can do that, and we should really be doing that. So I really would urge Cabinet and officers to have a look at that as we go along as well.
Okay, our next speaker is Hal. Hal McPhee, yeah.
Yeah. So just going on to the possibility again of another spike. One of the things that seems clear is that if it comes, it's going to come in October, when all the furlough is going to end. So we're going to have a much larger number of people either seeking universal benefit or unemployment benefit. And we've already seen the fact that the police, if you like, in dealing with the public more recently round, shall we say, have been quite understanding. But it seems to me that we should be planning for the fact that we may have a bit more disorder in October when we start to try and bring in these restrictions, and it'll be interesting to see how it works in Leicester. But my question, I suppose, is: do we feel, have there been talks with the police and the council officials over the likelihood that we may have a bit more trouble on our hands in October?
Okay, Al, was that a rhetorical question in the debate, or do you want us to open it up back to officers?
It was definitely rhetorical.
Oh, good, excellent, because I was quite keen to get you all debating, because we've heard such a lot of solid information. Karen Walker, Councillor Karen Walker next.
Thank you, Chair. Again, there's not enough detail in Appendix 1 on several things, and an example is RP13, a PDS panel, reprofile expenditure for dedicated support. So what does that mean? There's not enough detail there for councillors to understand that. And again, there's the reduced expenditure of licensing, hold back purchasing for canopies for traders. Why are we as a council buying canopies for traders? So, and I just really wanted to state that I think we should give council rent relief to businesses, as we will lose their income when they withdraw from their premises. We need to reduce parking charges to encourage people to come back into our city, because if we don't start looking to the future, our town, our city will become a ghost town. Thank you.
And Winston.
Yeah, I'm a bit more positive, having run a similar size organisation in 2008, which was pretty traumatic. I think it is important to be on the front foot, and I accept what the Chief Executive has said, that we're ahead of the curve and other councils in being proactive. I think it's important to be proactive and identify what the the council have done and not wait for government, who, and this isn't a political point, but there is a fair amount of disorganisation and different messages coming from government, and it could well be not until October, November until we know the full amount that they may help us this year. So I think you've got to put a plan together that does show a general recovery for this year, knowing that it's an iterative document, that it will change. And I'm sure the council officers have done a sensitivity analysis on various of the key income streams and expenditures to see where we are. So I'm broadly supportive of it. Interesting that the auditors are broadly supportive of the shape. I'm pleased to where we've got at the moment, but this isn't the end game. Things will develop. We're in Donald Rumsfeld territory. We don't know what we don't know, but let's be positive and let's be on the front foot. And this is what we've gone for. The one area where I perhaps think we will have to slightly revisit, looking at the overall shape, is earlier on in my career, I built up a chain of 13 convenience stores. So I know a little bit from where the traders are coming from. And I think it's a really tough ask. And I understand we're in sync with other unitary authorities. I think it's a tough ask that when you've lost, 75% plus of your turnover in 3 months, and you've deferred the rent, that to expect the whole of that rent to be paid in that year, that looks a tough call, particularly for the smaller traders. And we've got quite a few of them. So I suspect we may have to revisit that and the deferment period extended. The risk is that they go out of business and don't pay us at all. But if you've lost 75% of your turnover, as a lot of the small traders have, then there's a real risk of them going under as a result of being under this pressure, because not many people, particularly small traders, want to take on extra debt at the moment. So that's the only, not criticism, but commentary that I'd make on the overall shape. And I'm encouraged by the work that's been done at pace, the areas that have been covered, and the fact that we are on the front foot and not like other local authorities who are currently waiting for things to happen. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, I've got Councillor Hughes.
Oh, yes, just very quickly, following on from what Hal was saying, really. I mean, I do have a concern. I mean, as we open up the tourism, we've recently reopened the shops. This weekend, pubs and bars and restaurants are going to reopen. And we know that a second wave will be hugely detrimental to us financially, could cost us millions. So with that in mind, I'm just concerned about what level of enforcement we have in place. Because, I mean, surely a key Part 20 recovery plan is prevention of a reoccurrence. Are we saying that we're just relying on the police to enforce regulations, or is this something that the licensing officers within Baines should be addressing?
Okay, is that a rhetorical, or do you want an answer to that? You're throwing it into the debate, yeah?
I'm throwing it into the debate. I mean, particularly when we look at what's going on in Leicester at the moment. They're not going to be allowed to open their bars and restaurants. Their shops are being told they have to close again. It's going to cost Leicester millions of pounds. I'm concerned that we don't necessarily have the enforcement in place to try and control, to make sure that everyone's abiding by the government guidelines to try and control the possibility of a second wave.
Okay, and sorry, I've got Lucy on the list to speak.
I only wanted to say something positive about the shape, or the general shape of the finding the 20.7 million in cuts, really savings or cuts. That the way it's been structured, and an awful lot of work has, though there are things that we'd like more information on. There, awful lot of work has clearly gone into this, obviously, and the shape to take the biggest chunks from the biggest budgets, 56%, and from resources, and about 18% from adult services, which has the most, the biggest budget overall, gross expenditure budget. So 74% of that 20 million comes from those two areas alone, with the other smaller areas being preserved a little bit: climate emergency, transport, children's services. So that overall shape I'm pleased about.
Okay, thank you. One of the things I'm a bit puzzled by is we're a scrutiny panel, and the idea that we could have some scenarios in is not necessarily not been positive in my eyes. It's our job to be positive where we think that there's something that is important that's missing. And I don't see why it's been referred to, as if I'm right, as being critical. Surely, if we can put, as I keep saying, a 3-option thing for government providing money, why can we not have a little bit of work done on some what ifs more? And to think about it, there's a lot of work gone in, and I understand, yes, it's a developing situation, but for residents out there and some of us, wouldn't it be reassuring if we asked, could we please have a little bit of a list more of what could be coming up on the horizon, to acknowledge that we thought about it? Because a lot of the points that have been raised that feel like they're missing, we've had very good responses from officers. And I do think it may be just the way it's been presented that we're not actually getting that sense of resilience, which is perhaps there. So again, I appeal, without seeing it as negative, couldn't we have just a very small section on something to do with the resilience of this plan and have some scenarios, or a little bit more detail on the assumptions if they're there? I've got Councillor Warrington.
Yeah, so Chair, I made some sort of general, more strategic remarks earlier, and I just wanted to move into a little bit of detail. And it was something, and apologies, I picked up items from the paper and items from the webinar yesterday. And I have, I do have a little bit of a concern with the heritage, because I think we know that it's likely that people won't flock back. People are looking to go to less dense areas, which ironically probably turn out to be more dense, like Bournemouth Beach. But I am a bit concerned about the heritage, and I think that might be worth just having a look at and looking at some what if scenarios. And I think might have been you, Andy, who made a comment about believing that maybe the car parking revenue would pick up sooner than other areas, which I find interesting. And I don't know if you have any evidence to base that on, but a lot of people that I'm talking to, and including, I put myself in that, we're just not coming into Bath, and we're not going to areas where Baines are charging for car parking. So again, that might be a scenario to feed back some of that evidence back into, put that in the pot. Can I just point out, government money, whilst obviously welcome, and we should encourage that, I don't think it's going to be necessarily a complete solution, because it's still taxpayers' money. So that money still has to come from, the people who are continuing to work, however sporadically that might be. So it would be nice to have some resilience for ourselves, that we can find ways of mitigating without obviously using all our reserves. We can find some ways of mitigating and trying to be a little bit more self-sufficient. I understand that we are in a particularly unique situation on that. So, but I just would like to see whether there are some scenarios that we can come up with that isn't completely reliant on just government money. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Councillor Pritchard.
Yeah, just first off, you can hear me because I usually set this off in mute. But you have to look at public perceptions, and as the people generally see it, the government have given the council £10 million. That £10 million has been, as I say, the public perceive, is there to cover the COVID-19 interruption of the operation of council. Primarily, it's to do and spend totally on nothing else but COVID-19. So then there's all of the other elements of council. It has, I see it, that council have to temper itself to become a smaller organisation and build on. There's too much hope value. There are 3 scenarios as I'm looking at this paper where they're looking at different levels of government intervention, where they bring it in if they get a bigger award from government. I think that that's a hope value without substance. And we say, well, we're a special council because we're hit the worst than others because of our income stream being so adversely interrupted. I don't know that makes a special case against their things. You've got Leicester and looking where you're getting a second wave and things like this. You're likely to get second waves elsewhere, but we're not going to get, we're highly unlikely to be subject to a second wave. We're in one of the lowest authorities that have been adversely affected by COVID-19. And that's to our credit, obviously, but the government aren't going to look and see us as a special case. We need to stand alone, and we have to have a way forward that's going to say, well, the council has to be a smaller enterprise. What are we going to stop doing? What are we going to reduce doing? And things like that. And the public at large will probably understand that. And now, if there's an opportunity to do it, now is the time to do it. But I don't see that in the papers. It's trying to work. It's trying to build back to what's perceived as normal, so to go back to where we were. We will never be where we were, and I think that we have to be more realistic on
that. Okay, are there? Oh, Mark Elliott, Councillor Mark Elliott.
Chair, just to respond to that, I'd like to challenge that view that we want to see a smaller council. I don't want to see a smaller council. I want to see the council adjust the way it raises money. Certainly, it's going to need to reprofile some of its income, but I absolutely don't want to see the council reduce its size. I think that the shape of this plan is very good. It's very balanced. I think 20 million quid's worth of savings is ambitious in year, but I think it's a very sensible approach. And I think that we need to be ambitious about the future, not retreat into a corner. I think that it's not the time for us to decide that we're unnecessary or be timid. I think that what the last 3 months has proved is that people need local support. They need local councils. They need us to step up, not to retreat.
But if as an individual councillor, I could respond to that, I would hope that nobody in a sense disagrees about the role of the council, but maybe fundamentally where I'm coming from is to actually perform that role, we need the income to do it. So you have a choice. We can either reduce, as one person said, or we can actually be sure of our resilience to work out where the money's coming from. But there's that famous Dickensian character that talks about the balance. And although it's possible to borrow and we do have assets, we do need to be able to fund. And the one point is that I'm still concerned about our resilience to fund that councillor then of the same size. Because as I understand it, this plan does not propose to significantly reduce the size. The savings are one-off. Those savings are going to have to be found again next year. And however much we're told this is an in-year plan, I worry maybe it needs more of a paragraph that says we are doing something now to tackle that issue. Because it's not long till the 31st of March when we're into a new financial year. So I see two sides of the same issue, but I don't see the bridge. I think that's my position. I can see what Councillor Pritchard said, and Mark, I very much respect what you've said, but where is the ability then of those two sides of the coin to relate together? So we've had a range of very detailed questions, and trying to draw this together, we've had some ideas, as I've noted, and if we could focus on drawing it together a little bit, that there's been talk of this rent relief to business, and the impact there of paying before the end of the year and the impact then on the council. There's the comment been made about parking charges. I've made a comment about scenarios. Is there anything else that people would specifically like to propose we comment, and then we could go through these, and we'll have the minutes of the meeting with all the points we've raised. So would that be okay if we tried to draw it together to see if we could come up with a list of things, for Cabinet to think about to start with? Anybody can speak?
Yeah, just Chair, just should we hear Councillor Samuel now, or because he didn't want to come in?
What is it, Councillor Samuel? Is it a question or a statement? Because having got to the crucial point of the debate, I just wanted to check where we were coming from.
Chairman, this debate has gone in entirely the wrong direction. You all spent an awful lot of time arguing and talking about what this report is and isn't. It was never intended to be a medium-term financial strategy covering the next 3 years. It is an in-year report dealing with a crisis. And the points that several members have made about future assumptions and future modelling, of course these are understood. I, for one, do not believe for 1 minute that the income levels that the council has received in the past will return next year, the year after, or maybe 5 years' time. They will be different. And the reason they will be different is that there are factors at play that we cannot yet model or predict with any certainty. So I think it is quite instructive to look at what is happening in Leicester, not in any detail, but just the principle of a local lockdown there. I think I agree with Councillor Pritchard that there is probably less chance of a second wave here because the first wave was extremely small. And there are particular factors at play in Leicester which have probably led to the recurrence of the coronavirus. But what's interesting about Leicester is that, amongst other things, today the government has announced that it's going to extend the furlough scheme just in Leicester. So there are very rapid decisions being made at central government level in response to what happens. But returning to Bath and North East Somerset, the income levels that the council has grown to rely on, and that's the way I'd put it, are not likely to be there next year in the same degree. We can go into that if people want, and I have said publicly that I expect parking income to return more quickly because if people are placing less reliance on public transport, then there's a higher likelihood they will use their cars, and they will use car parking where that is necessary for what they're doing. I do not expect heritage income to return to its previous levels. Social distancing of one sort or another is going to be a feature for at least the next 12 months, possibly longer. So we will not be able to accommodate the same numbers of people at the Roman baths or the pump rooms or at concerts in the assembly rooms. It won't be possible. So the income levels will drop. It's inevitable. And the points about the commercial estate, I think it may take 5 years before we see any return to previous levels of income. And actually, one of the things I don't think I want to do is to wait for conditions in the market to improve. The council is going to have to make some decisions about the makeup of its commercial estate. And it is going to have to decide whether it wishes to exit from some areas of ownership and moves into others, It would be the wrong time to make those decisions now when the market is still in a state of flux, but we are going to have to consider those issues as a council. So to come back to the beginning of that debate, which I think has gone in the wrong direction, is there will be a different financial environment next year. And Andy and I will, as soon as this has gone through the decision process, we will be starting work on that medium-term financial planning process and the budgeting for next year, as we had always intended to do at this point of the year. So you can be assured as a panel that we have our sights very much on the succeeding years, because we know we will have challenges there. So there's absolutely no question that we are not doing it. But it is not in this report, because this report is what it says on the tin. It's a recovery report for this year. I expect fully that as time goes on, other factors will emerge, some of which we aren't even aware of at the moment, that will influence our decision making. And you can be assured that we will take those into account. So I think I do want to discourage you from thinking that this report is something that it isn't. It is not intended.
I think you've made that point. So if we could, I'd like to respond to that, because in a way, I wish I could get a transcript of what you've just said and put it in the report, because contrary to what I believed was you didn't know and think about what was happening, you've clearly got a whole range of assumptions about parking, heritage, not coming previous levels in the next 12 months, estate, 5 years. I'm sorry, if I'm a member of the public, let alone a councillor, and I see in the press that the councillor's short of all this money, I don't call that transparency, that you have to listen to a panel on YouTube instead of it being put in the report. If you'd only just put in what you just said, you just satisfied me. Where's the danger in that? But at the moment, I'm afraid it sort of looks like O-level recovery plan, and I think you're capable of better. You've just given mainly what I was hoping to get from Cabinet to change. So couldn't you just add that as a bit of commentary to reassure us all you know what you're doing? Because you clearly do, and I think you're selling yourself short, and I think you're selling this council short. So I would like to propose that we actually ask the Cabinet member and the finance team to put in a bit of what he just said, so that, you know, I don't think that's overcommitting you, but it does give a vibe. And it's exactly like the last panel where I said, what percentage of the budget have we lost? And nobody could say, and I hope you don't mind me saying, I asked you a few days later, and you gave me a sort of intuitive feel, and okay, it may not be legally perfect, but I tell you what, the average person in the street would, I think, be quite reassured to hear that sort of assumption and backing, and instead of just thinking it's not been covered or thought about. So thank you. I really, really welcome your intervention there personally, and that's not as chair. So are there any other people wanting to comment, because time's going on?
Chair.
Yeah, Winston.
Yeah, bit of perspective here. This is not an O-level recovery plan. This is a first-class piece of work. And I think I would ask you, Chair, respectfully, perhaps to withdraw that remark. That's how it came across. I think, look, you're quite rightly asking for a little more to give the picture, perhaps, of the way forward and some of the sensitivity analysis which Councillor Samuel has covered. That's not a big addition to this report, and that doesn't make it an O-level to a PhD. This is a first-class piece of work. There should be no doubt about that.
I think it is potentially first class. I suppose I'll withdraw O-level, but the point is that I'm feeling so frustrated that, having had a debate where I've said that something's missing and we could be constructive, then the Cabinet member goes through it, and that's really positive. The point I was trying to make is, all right, not O-level, it would further elevate this report. And I'm trying to be positive, and yet I'm getting pushback as if, like, this meeting has totally sort of missed the point. How do I feel as chair there? Could I be equally offended that that's a low-level comment? Because I think this panel's done a very good job today, both asking questions and, you know, what goes one way goes another. And actually, as chair of the meeting, I could start asking for an apology, saying that the debate's gone the wrong way. The debate has gone the way the panel members wanted to. But to pull this together and be constructive, are we not all debating to agree that if there's information that's positive and could be as concise as what the cabinet member said, could we not have that in the report?
Chairman, I will address that point when I present this to the Cabinet on later this week. I don't think it needs to be said, and I think it's actually covered in the report, but if it's important for wider consumption, I'm happy to reiterate that point when we discuss it later this week. So I'll leave it at that.
Okay, well, I really welcome that, but as it's the job of the panel now to draw together its conclusions, as I was going through, we had a list of questions which we can note. We had a list of comments which will be in the minutes. The substantive points are relief to business, reviewing parking charges, and then this point about could we have some more detail. Now, do panel members have any more things that they think substantively we could have as comments? And then can we go through each of these to see whether we're happy to put some comments through to request to cabinet or not? Yeah. Are there any more comments?
Chair.
I would add at the start that we would welcome all the hard work and the opportunity to scrutinise this excellent report. Yeah, and
Chair, on the parking charges, you know, it's been a very valid point made on the parking charges. But the trouble is that the counter to that is the air quality. Now, already you only have to walk in towards the city centre in my ward today, yeah, and the air quality is markedly different than it was this time last week. So and we know, David Redwell was talking earlier, that more people are going to be using their private car and somebody else's, you know, than public transport, because we're being discouraged from public transport for all the right reasons, etc. So more people will go in their private car into the city centre. The point made by both Karens, I believe, was that a lot of people will not wish to go to the city centre, which brings its own problems itself. But those that are coming by private car rather than public transport. And I don't think we're in the congestion state, but the air quality is already markedly different than it was this time last week. So moving parking charges down a scale to encourage more car park parking may be an answer, but at the same time, we need to think about parking as a whole, i.e. should we be removing on-street parking and force everyone into a car park where we can control the pricing and the volumes, etc., rather than all this circulating traffic that is now going on yet again. So, you know, I just wanted to make a point that it's not just car park charges, it's the whole issue of private vehicles, circulating traffic, and air quality that you have to put into the mix. Thank you.
If we added to that, could the cabinet consider the issue of parking charges, but in the context of climate emergency policy as well, or considering it, would that make it more acceptable to you, Andy?
It would, thank you, Chair. Yeah.
Yeah, and so we've got here then, we've got, what about the relief to business? Does anybody have any comment on that? And the concern over the rents in the commercial estate?
Yeah, Chair, it was me who raised it. I think that's partly guided by my experience of having run small traders and, you know, or the equivalent of. And, you know, I understand the officers will be benchmarking against other authorities, and they've got to be careful not to do something at this stage which could prejudice the discussion, negotiation with central government. I would just like to put it as an observation, really, in the report that this may need revisiting, because knowing the finances and the management accounts, if you're down 75%, that's a huge hit. And not many sensible traders would want to take out further loans to finance that in the future at this point in time, where so many of them, as we know, across the country, not just in Baines, are really on the cusp. It could go either way. And how quickly the comeback comes is very material. And I think we need to be seen to be giving that support within the confines of what we can do financially. We need to be seen to be making a gesture to particularly the small traders, in my view.
Okay, so I'm not seeing any further speakers or suggestions. So
sorry, I did put something in earlier.
Oh, I'm sorry,
Councillor Myers, but I just, a couple of us kind of confirmed that I think it's in the spirit of being positive about it. I think it's important that a few of us confirmed that we were happy with the overall shape of the plan, and I think that it's important that we emphasise perhaps that. I mean, certainly I was very happy to see that they protected areas such as climate emergency and traffic as areas, and I think that there were a couple of us who said that we thought the overall shape of the plan and the shape of the reductions was sensible. I think that I'd want to emphasise that as we move forward and plans do come forward for next year and subsequent years, that those areas continue to be protected.
Okay, there are several ways we can do this. We can make a list of the key comments made and agree that we don't all agree with them, but that they were the comments made. If I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, if we want to have a single resolution that comes from the panel, then it will be harder for everybody to agree on such a broad statement of support based on some of the comments made. Now, it could be that we take a vote and some people get it what they want and some people don't. So the choice is for the panel. Do we, I mean, I think it goes without say that, is it fair to say that everybody welcomes the hard work that's gone into it and the detail, yeah, and the opportunity to debate it, but saying we like the overall shape is a bit, it could do with some more for people to really react against it. Do people want to comment on that?
Is it worth going to a vote on that?
Yeah. So, Mark, do you want to put the proposal?
I'd like to propose that we commend the overall shape of the recovery plan.
Okay, and I'll just pull up my list of names to go round. Can you be a bit more specific about shape? Just to
that the balance between taking money from reserves, assumptions about government funding, and reduction in spending, that the balance amongst those things is the right kind of balance.
Okay, let me just find the list. Right, if I can go round, Councillor Dogood.
I'd be supportive of that.
Councillor Elliott.
For, obviously.
Councillor Furs.
I support.
Councillor Hodge.
Yes, obviously I support that too.
Councillor Hughes.
I'm not 100% sure I'm happy with the question, but yeah, I'll support the general shape of it.
Okay, Councillor McPhee.
Support.
Me, I'm against. Councillor Singleton.
Support.
And Councillor Warrington.
Against.
Right,
I'm concerned about the government.
Yeah, no, it's just a vote. So on that basis, the first comment through is concerning that the panel on a vote supported the overall shape. Okay. when it came to the relief to business, could I propose that the Cabinet consider the implications? Because I think they need to look at it commercially. They consider the implications and timing of paying rent arrears by the end of the year and the impact on business. I think that gives room for scope whilst recognising the issue. Okay, so is there a, sort of any suggestion of clarifying that more, or could I put that to the vote?
Does that help you, Winston? Is that something that we can? You had expressed something the same.
Yes, I'm happy with that commentary. It doesn't tie hands, and the council has to be cognizant of what's happening in the real world. It doesn't commit them. I just want them to try and look at that and going forward.
Okay, so if we could go then on a vote on that issue, if people are happy. So Councillor Dogood.
In favour.
Councillor Elliott.
Support.
Councillor Furze.
I support that, Chair.
Councillor Hodge.
Yes, for that too.
Councillor Hughes.
For.
Councillor McPhee.
Support.
Yeah, myself, I support. Councillor Singleton.
Support.
Councillor Warrington.
Support.
So that's that one passed. On the next one that I had on the list, it was concerning consider reviewing parking charges whilst being mindful of climate emergency issues. So that picks up Andy's point. And Andy, would that wording satisfy you?
Yeah, if we're going forward with that, Chair, yeah, that extra wording would satisfy me. Thank you.
Okay. If there's no other comment, if we could put that to the vote, yeah. Okay. Then we've got Councillor Dogood.
Support.
Councillor Elliott.
Support.
Councillor Furze.
Support that, Chair.
Councillor Hodge.
Yes, agreed for that.
Councillor Hughes.
Yeah, for.
Councillor McPhee.
For.
Councillor Myers, that's me, yes. For. Councillor Singleton.
For.
Councillor Warrington.
For.
Okay. And the final one I'd like to propose is to, as softly as possible, it would be to ask that the Cabinet could put in reference to some of the points made by the Cabinet member, which gave an indication for the future of some of the broad assumptions on parking, heritage in the next 12 months, and the commercial estate over 5 years, but only indicatively, yeah? And if without putting words in your mouth, Councillor Samuels, you did in any case offer to mention that. Does that still stand?
Chairman, if you read paragraph 3.8 of the report, all these points are covered. Parking, commercial estate, tourism review, workforce opportunities, and design of the organisation. All of these things are in the report at 3.8, and I'm sure the Cabinet will accept them if that helps.
But the clarification of narrative you gave was what I was really hoping for out of today. So if you feel they're in there and could be clarified to the sense I've raised, but anyway, that you think they're in there, but could I put it to the vote that what I said about and what Councillor Samuel said, to just put some wording in about those long-term or longer-term assumptions? So does anybody want to comment? No? Can we go to a vote? Councillor Dogood?
I'd support you, Chair. I think that could be extended a bit.
Councillor Elliott?
I'm not sure it belongs in this report. Against, I think.
Councillor Furze?
I'll support that, Chair.
Councillor Hodge?
I'm actually confused about what we're asking for in this one, Can you just explain it again for me? Sorry.
It was really to summarise what the cabinet member said, or this idea of the, if it isn't a long-term plan, at least referring to these basic assumptions in the narrative way you described of parking coming back more quickly, heritage, you know, it hopefully starting the next 12 months, and the commercial estate with its 5 years, and you know, and that sort of time scale, to just illustrate that they are really being addressed. And although he says they're in there, that wasn't my understanding in the same way. So given we've had the understanding, that's what I was trying to achieve.
I'm just going to abstain on this because I think 3.8 does cover those things.
Councillor Hughes?
For.
Councillor McPhee?
Against.
Me for. Councillor Singleton?
For.
Councillor Warrington?
For.
Mark, if you've added that up, can you say what the vote was in the end?
Yes, Chair, there's a substantial number in favour of your proposal.
Okay, so that then is carried. Okay, and for balance, because could Winston, could we make a note that when that is drafted, that you and I will look at the wording of that together, as it's a potentially more split, finer split issue? Would that be fair?
Happy to do that, Chair.
Then it sends across party whatever comes forward as a draft. Okay. Now I'm very conscious of time, but I think we've covered a huge subject today, and I think we've had a good debate, and we just now need to move on to our final agenda item, I believe, which is, I'll just move down my notes, the panel work plan. So our panel work plan, if you're not familiar with it, presents the work we're looking to do going ahead so that the council and officers and everybody can prepare as we can. We had an agenda planning meeting earlier today. What I can do is, there's two ways around this. I could run through what Winston and I discussed with officers as a starting point, and then you could add, or if people are bursting with ideas, would you like to present your ideas first for future agenda items? No, I'm not seeing. If somebody wants to speak, they use their microphone. No, well, on that basis, I'm not seeing any comments, and I've not got any speakers. So the idea we had earlier today was that we actually looked at the position the council was in with regard to finances and resources, and as a panel, over the next 3 sessions, we had one agenda item for the first session, which was where are we now? And we actually look and debate at the position of the resources and related aspects. And then the second one is really to look at where do we really want to be as a council, looking at that reducing dependency and the issues. And the third area, by that time, the council will be looking at its plans, hopefully, and we'll be looking at, well, how are they going to be related together? And that alongside that, in meeting 1, we look at the call-in recommendation that the cabinet member has kindly said he'll report back to us. On the second meeting, we've got the customer service type feedback from the officer who wanted a bit more time to update it in the light of COVID. And we've also got a procurement paper which is looking to be updated. And then the third meeting could be looking at the commercial estate plans if they're developing, as the cabinet member described. And also, you'll remember we have on our plan the budget structure. And we wondered if by the next third meeting, the budget would be in a position where we begin to comment, and I think Councillor Hughes, you suggested the idea whereby we have last year's and next year's figures in the same document. So that's where we could do some work on that. And then, so that was a basic basis of some ideas for things for us to put on our forward plan. And in doing that, where are we now and where do we want to be and how we'd get there, we could be helping and supporting the administration, looking and joining in with them on some policy development. But also in the discussion, it came out that perhaps as a panel, at a time when officers are very committed work-wise, we could, using Zoom, actually pull in some speakers or examples from other parts of the country on what other people are doing with their commercial estate, and just some slightly different ways of bringing in evidence and ideas, really, that we could actually assist the cabinet member and be very constructive with. So I throw that those ideas open, and maybe if you've got any other ideas to add to that. Are you all worked out? So, right, have I got, oh, is it? I'm trying to just look at the timing. Councillor Hodge, did you want to speak?
Yes, I'm sorry. I want to go back to another thing that I wanted to have a chance to cover in the meeting, because I think we've been given these very detailed reports, annexes, 3 annexes, that there is some detail in them that I feel residents, my duty really to get the answers to for residents. And I thought maybe at the end of this, I just want to say this quickly before the meeting ends, that we might have a list of things, because we've got cabinet members here, that this is really our final occasion to raise these questions again, and not particularly controversial questions, but I would have thought possibly other panel members might still have a few that haven't seen these reports so often as well. And is that an opportunity going to rise? And my 2 examples really are something that I've been concerned about with the capital programme that we agreed for transport. LTN funding of 200,000 seems to have disappeared out of the equation.
Are you suggesting this goes on the forward plan? Because we're on this item.
No, I'm suggesting it's covered in this meeting, really, that this is our meeting for noting this financial recovery report with all its annexes.
We're on a different agenda item now. We're on the forward plan. And
I suppose I'm suggesting we've missed those details off. You know, we've kind of moved on to the forward plan without finishing. Because we had the cabinet members here to answer some of these questions.
Well, I can't help but say that having spent over an hour debating, discussing it and asking questions, and then producing resolutions and then voting finally on what we do to cabinet, and then moving on, I asked for any more speakers. I moved on to the next agenda item. It's rather awkward now to go back. I mean, I don't know, can I have some legal advice?
That's fine. I'll address the queries. I'll just address them in writing. That's fine.
Yeah, that's it. I don't wish to curtail debate, but time is going on. It's almost 7 and I am conscious of time. So just referring back to the forward plan, do people have any more suggestions for putting it on our work plan for the panel?
Well, Chair, just following up from what Lucy said then, maybe the capital programme, all right, a bit more in-depth look at the capital programme, because as time moves on, it will be honed and the things will be added or drop off.
Yeah.
Maybe a good.
Yeah. So that's the capital programme. So where would you like that to be? Would you like that a reference at the next meeting? Yes.
I think the next meeting may be timely enough. Yeah.
Okay.
I would support that. Would have liked a bit more time on it today, but so I'd like to see it at the next meeting.
That's good. Okay, well, we can put that, can't we, Mark, into the minutes and request that. So with regard to the other suggestions for the work plan, you're all either totally stunned or in disagreement. So there's some suggestions that Winston and I went through in an hour-long meeting before. Shall we try it this way? As it seems, I think the life energy is probably getting a bit low. What if we agreed to only put those as a draft into the work plan for now, and then when the notes come out for the next meeting, we'd have something solid in front of us to debate, yeah? And whatever we put in, we can always amend. So I don't want you to feel you're being railroaded, but on the other hand, I am concerned that officers do want to begin to prepare for the future meetings. So for the next meeting, it would be the capital programme, the call-in, and a sort of a bit like a review of where are we now then, sort of strategically, and just looking at it that way. And then you'll see the draft there on in, okay? So, Councillor Warrington.
There is one issue that we might like to just put on the list, but it will be premature. We looked at the corporate HR strategy last year, and we looked at bringing it back sort of six months, I think it was. Yeah. And I recognise that it is due to COVID. That's one of the things that I would expect to be put on hold, but I'm keen that it stays on the list.
Okay.
Whether that's deferred for another 6 months or longer, I'm not that fussed, but I really do think it should go on the work plan.
Well, for now, how would it be to put it on for the next about meeting, our third following meeting, yeah? And we'll put it there on the list, yeah? And we can review that, how it fits together next time. Yeah,
Will can tell us. I'm not sure when Cherry Bennett is back. I would imagine that she's either back or it's imminent, but she was the one that presented it to us originally.
Yeah, Cherry returned on the 1st of June, so she's back in post.
Okay, excellent. So on that basis, could I just, to be really clear, because you're so quiet, put it to the vote that we put the draft ideas in, and then we have that on an agenda item for our next meeting. So could I just rattle through that down the list? I'll just find the list. Right, that's Councillor Dogood.
Support.
Councillor Elliott.
Support.
Councillor Furs.
Support.
Councillor Hodge.
Yes, support.
Councillor Hughes.
Support.
Councillor McPhee.
Support.
Me, support. Councillor Singleton.
Support.
Councillor Warrington.
Support.
Excellent. So, after a very good afternoon into the evening work, I'd like to thank all the officers who supported the meeting, the Cabinet for being in waiting and showing their interest in coming along, and also members of the public who've watched in on YouTube. The next panel meeting is due to take place on the 27th of July at 4 p.m. And otherwise, at this point, I'd like to formally close the meeting and thank you all. Thank you very much.